They always give it back. That's what she'd tell interviewers with a small smile. I get it from them, and they get it from me. We pour into each other. That, she said, was why she could still sprint across a stage at an age when most people had already sat down. Her audience fed her like electricity. "Where are you?" the voice on the phone asked. "I'm in Philadelphia," she replied. "I want you to come to my show tonight." "Your show?" she asked, half laughing. "Who are you out there with?" "Myself," he said. She paused. "And what exactly are you doing?" They called her the godmother of soul. The woman who cooked for presidents, steadied broken crowds, and according to more than a few hushed conversations, buried her rivals with nothing but a note and a stare. But at 81, Patti LaBelle isn't feeding anyone's ego anymore. For the first time in a career that stretched across generations, the Queen of Philly Soul started saying out loud the names she had kept locked away for nearly 50 years. The 5 men she said she truly hated, names that once echoed in recording studios, gleamed in liner notes on platinum albums, and, as some colleagues quietly insisted, were carved into the darkest corners of her memory. These were men who loved her voice but were unsettled by her power. Men who smiled for cameras, shook her hand on red carpets, and then, according to people who worked closest to them, wounded her in hallways and dressing rooms where no one was supposed to see. Behind every standing ovation there was a bruise no audience could clap away. Behind every gospel high note was a memory she could not forgive. They called her Mother Patti because she took care of everyone's singers, band members, dancers, lost kids who wandered into the business with no armor. But she remembered every betrayal. Half a century of music, 2 marriages that didn't survive the workload, and a legacy welded together by both mercy and fire led to this quiet, dangerous moment of truth. This isn't the story of a saint or a cartoon diva. It is the confession of a woman who survived being turned into her own legend and lived long enough to tell what it cost. 5 names, 5 scars, and one truth the music world hoped would stay buried with old contracts and dead headlines. 1. Wilson Pickett, the threat that shook the stage. He was the first name on her list. The man whose voice could lift a crowd to its feet and whose temper, witnesses said, could stop a heartbeat. In the smoky, restless summer of 1969, when soul music ruled American airwaves and every stage felt like a battlefield, Patti LaBelle learned how fast applause could turn into something darker. Wilson Pickett was Southern soul royalty, explosive, magnetic, and, according to musicians who traveled with him, feared even by his closest friends. They called him the Wicked Pickett, and he wore the nickname like armor and a warning label. Patti, still climbing with the Bluebells, had been invited to open for his Gospel Soul Tour that year. On paper, it looked like mentorship, maybe even a blessing, a rising group stepping onto the same bill as a giant. She expected camaraderie, maybe a little guidance. What she got instead, according to people who were there, was a lesson in how male rage could hide inside genius. On the 15th of August 1969, inside Chicago's historic Regal Theater, soundcheck started like any other. The band ran through 634 to 5,789, Pickett's anthem, while Patti and her girls floated in with background harmonies that wrapped around his lead like silk. Pickett was already on edge. Tired from the road, he barked at the musicians, cursing between takes when a horn came in late or a drum fill hit wrong. Patti, never shy about her gift, waited for her cue. When it came, she let go. A spontaneous gospel run, unscripted, sliced through the empty seats with the force of a Sunday service. The note hung in the air, bright and dangerous. A few crew members clapped. A couple of reporters in the house laughed in surprise. For one sharp second, she had outsung the man everyone swore was untouchable. Then the room went still. According to multiple people who later described the moment, Pickett's eyes narrowed. He walked toward her, slow and deliberate, letting his microphone fall from his hand so hard the metal cracked against the stage. He leaned in close enough for her to feel his breath. "If I had a gun, I'd shoot you." No one moved. The scattered applause died mid-echo. One of the Bluebells, it was said, started to cry. Pickett turned away, his boots echoing off the wood like drumbeats, and disappeared down the hallway. No apology, no explanation, Just that sentence, hanging in the air. That night, Patti still performed, but with her eyes lowered and her shoulders held rigid. Every note walked a thin line between defiance and fear. Later, the label smoothed the story over, describing it as a misunderstanding at rehearsal. But inside dressing rooms and tour buses, musicians whispered it for years. The Queen of Philly Soul had stepped on the wrong man's ego and lived to talk about it. His temper, the industry would later see, was not a rare flare-up. Pickett's rages became infamous. In 1974, he was arrested for assaulting a woman in his home. In 1987, he faced charges after firing a gun during a domestic dispute. In 1991, he was convicted for injuring a pedestrian while driving intoxicated. Each new headline, according to those close to Patti, reminded her of the side of him she had seen that quiet afternoon in Chicago. She never said his name in public again. But she changed her life in the shadow of that threat. From that tour forward, she hired her own bodyguard. She started reading every contract herself, refusing to leave her safety or her schedule entirely in someone else's hands. Most of all, she refused to let any man, no matter how famous, dictate how bright she was allowed to burn on stage. Friends said that moment scarred her, but it also steeled her. It taught her that in the music business, a woman's talent could be both a crown and a target. Years later, when a journalist casually asked why she had never cut a record with Wilson Pickett, she gave an answer that sliced as clean as that old gospel run. Because some men can't stand when a woman sings louder than they do. When Wilson Pickett died in January 2006, the world mourned a legend. Tributes poured in, retrospectives praised his voice, his influence, his fire. Patti, according to those around her, sent flowers, nothing else. No TV tribute, no long statement, no pilgrimage to the funeral. For her, he remained the man who proved that brilliance without restraint is just violence with rhythm. The first wound on a list she would carry in silence for most of her life. Proof that even the loudest cheers can hide something that feels like a loaded gun. And as that chapter, at least publicly, closed, another waited in the wings. Because if Pickett was the storm that almost broke her, the next man on her list would hit somewhere far colder, not with rage, but with ego. If you know someone whose life or personality mirrors this story, share their name in the comments. We'd like to explore their journey as well. Every kingdom only has room for one ruler. In the 1,970 seconds, soul music had two, a godfather and a queen, and neither one knew how to bow. If Wilson Pickett had shown Patti LaBelle how rage could turn a stage into a weapon, James Brown would show her something colder, how ego could turn admiration into humiliation. Their conflict wasn't born from pure hatred. It was born from recognition. He was, in many ways, the mirror she never asked to look into. Brilliant, explosive, and, as many who worked for him said, allergic to sharing the spotlight. By 1973, James Brown was beyond touch. Sex Machine, The Payback, Get Up Offa. That thing, every new record rewired the culture, bending the world to his rhythm. He came into rooms in a cloud of silk, sweat, and noise, flanked by bodyguards and handlers, floating on an ego big enough to swallow the Los Angeles Convention Center whole. Patti, freshly reborn from the Bluebells into LaBelle, had just detonated expectations of what a black woman could be on stage. She traded gowns for metallic bodysuits, heartbreak ballads for songs about power, and polite choreography for full-force gospel fury wrapped in glam rock. The industry crowned James Brown the godfather of soul. But she was the queen of fire, and the godfather didn't kneel for queens. Their paths crossed constantly. Festivals, TV specials, charity galas, award stages where black music was finally being acknowledged after decades in the shadows. Brown commanded his stage like a drill sergeant. Patti treated hers like a pulpit. Behind closed doors, producers and promoters whispered that the tension between them crackled. They respected each other, but only at a distance. Two forces everyone believed could never truly collide without something breaking. The collision came in May 1973 at the Soul Train Music Awards in Los Angeles. The ceremony was broadcast live from the Aquarius Theater on Sunset Boulevard, a shining televised celebration of the rise of black music Backstage, though, the mood was less celebration and more chess match. Patti arrived in a crimson jumpsuit, fresh from a European run, her hair sculpted, her voice rested, her presence loud before she even spoke. James Brown arrived late, about 20 minutes after he was due, wrapped in a white fur cape that flashed under the hallway lights like a moving spotlight. He was scheduled to close the show with his band, the JBs. But, according to crew members and show staff, rumors had already started to swirl that Don Cornelius wanted Patti to end the night with Down the Aisle, the song that left audiences in tears so often it felt like a ritual. Minutes before airtime, witnesses said Brown confronted the show's director in a narrow hallway. Voices rose. He argued that nobody closed a show after James Brown. The conversation pulled in stagehands, performers, and reporters like gravity. Someone, trying to keep the peace, called Patti over. She walked into the circle, unaware at first of just how hot the temperature had gotten. What happened next became one of the most whispered-about moments in Soul Train history. According to multiple eyewitnesses, later echoed in a 1974 Ebony magazine piece, Brown turned his frustration toward Patti the second she stepped in. He accused her of trying to turn a funk celebration into church. He mocked her signature gospel grimaces and expressions, calling them those church faces, like they were a joke instead of her lifeblood. The crew froze. Other artists watched from doorways. Patti, used to conflict but not disrespect, tried to cool things down. She said she only wanted to offer her song and honor the crowd. Brown laughed, shrugged off his fur cape, and tossed it to a handler, then walked away, muttering that the stage wasn't a place for preachers. Backstage cameras caught pieces of the argument, raised voices, tense faces, a flash of Patti's hurt expression. It was enough. Gossip columns didn't need the full tape. Within days, Jet magazine ran a headline that essentially announced a clash between Brown and LaBelle behind the curtain. Soul newspaper called it the Royal Rift of Rhythm. To viewers, it played like drama. 2 icons, 2 crowns, 1 stage. To Patti, it was something much sharper. It was humiliation. What cut deepest wasn't the insult itself. It was what followed. The laughter, the way the incident was spun into entertainment. For the people at home, it was just a story 2 stars in a spat. But inside Patti's dressing room that night, the scene was different. She peeled off her lashes with shaking hands and cried quietly into a towel, according to someone who was there. To her makeup artist, she whispered, "He really thinks he's the only one who can burn." That moment didn't just bruise her pride. It left a mark that followed her for years. She stopped accepting invitations to shows where James Brown's name appeared on the same bill. When BET organized a tribute to soul legends in 1978, she reportedly pulled out just hours before airtime after learning he would headline the event. Even Quincy Jones, one of the few men the industry agreed could talk to anyone, tried and failed to bridge the gap at a private dinner in 1980. When someone at that dinner asked if she and James would ever perform together, Patti answered with a calm that was sharper than any shout. "We already did," she said. "He played God. I played myself." Their clash grew into something larger than either of them. It became a symbol. James Brown represented a kingdom built on control fines for band members who missed cues, punishments for imperfect steps, every breath choreographed. Patti stood for something else: chaos, surrender, spirit over structure. Their feud wasn't just ego versus ego, it was discipline versus divine madness. Male authority versus female rebellion. The strict general versus the wild preacher. 2 different philosophies of black genius colliding in a single hallway. Ironically, both of them became victims of their own myths. By the late 1972, James Brown's empire started to erode under the weight of tax problems, business disputes, and growing legal trouble. Patti's story bent in the opposite direction. With Lady Marmalade, she became more than just a singer. She became an emblem, a symbol of daring, of reinvention, of a woman who refused to stay in any box the industry built for her. When reporters asked her about the feud in 1984, she didn't pretend it never happened. "He was brilliant," she said, "but his ego was ungodly." It was one of the few times she put his name and her true feelings in the same sentence on the record. Then came 1988. James Brown was arrested on charges that included domestic violence, a moment that shocked fans, even as some industry insiders privately said they weren't surprised. When Patti was asked whether she felt sorry for him, she paused. "I don't like seeing a man destroy his own kingdom," she answered softly. "But I warned him, you can't be your own God forever." On Christmas Day 2006, when James Brown died, the world once again turned him into legend. There were specials, tributes, retrospectives. Old footage played on loop, him dropping to his knees, the cape, the sweat, the scream. Patti stayed still. No official statement, no tearful TV appearance, no dramatic arrival at his funeral in Augusta. Just silence. The same silence she had started using to end every feud she knew. In her heart, she had already outlived. Behind that silence was a truth the public rarely understood. Her hatred of him wasn't just rooted in rivalry. It was rooted in disappointment. James Brown was, in many ways, everything she wished men in the industry could be: fearless, visionary, a force big enough to change entire genres. But she believed he used that power not to lift her, or women like her, but to remind them exactly where they were not supposed to stand. That day in 1973, when he mocked her faith and her church-born expressions, he wasn't just taking aim at Patti LaBelle. He was mocking every woman who had ever hauled gospel into a world run by men who confused control with genius. In the end, she respected his music, but not the way he wielded his soul. The godfather of soul may have ruled the charts, but she outlasted him, a queen who no longer needed permission, carrying scars that turned into songs. James Brown bruised her pride, but he also locked in her purpose. From that clash on, Patti LaBelle stopped chasing crowns other people tried to place on her head. She started burning them, and the next man on her list would do something far more devastating than mocking her faith or trying to steal the spotlight. He wouldn't just challenge her power, he would make her question the very thing that once anchored her, her belief. If you know someone whose life or personality mirrors this story, share their name in the comments. We'd like to explore their journey as well. He found God after sin. She found sin inside God's men. That was how Patti LaBelle would later describe, in private moments, the man who turned her faith into suspicion. Reverend Al Green, the velvet voice of soul. The man who could make holiness sound like temptation and temptation sound like a prayer. In the 1,970 seconds, no one in gospel or soul matched his blend of sanctity and seduction. Women sobbed at his concerts. Men tried to mimic his tone. The church praised his rebirth, calling him a living testimony. But Patti saw something else flickering behind the halo, a shadow that harmonized perfectly with his charm. Their paths crossed in 1977 when Atlantic Records floated a proposal that seemed heaven-sent, a gospel duet that could bridge generations of soul. Patti had just walked out of the LaBelle era and into a more spiritual chapter, exploring music that felt like prayer and rebellion at once. Al Green, meanwhile, was remaking himself as a preacher after surviving one of the most shocking domestic incidents in music history. On paper, the collaboration was supposed to mend the split between the sacred and the secular. Instead, it became a quiet war about hypocrisy, control, and fear. It began in Memphis, Tennessee, inside Royal Recording Studios, a modest brick building where Al Green had recorded some of his earliest hits. The first session was set for the 14th of April, 1977. Patti arrived in a white pantsuit and silver heels, carrying a Bible and a stack of lyric notes. Every detail was deliberate, part respect, part self-protection. Al greeted her with a long embrace and a smile that, as one producer later observed, didn't quite reach his eyes. The room felt like holy chaos. According to an engineer who worked that day, gospel musicians tuning up, cables snaking across the floor, and Al pacing like a restless pastor about to take the pulpit. The duet was called "Lord, Lift Me Higher." It was meant to be a redemption anthem, something that sounded like a second chance. But as the microphones warmed and the tape began to roll, the session started to come apart. According to sound engineer Willie Mitchell Jr., Patti questioned the arrangement, saying the rhythm section was so busy it buried the message. She wanted the words to breathe. Al answered, not with a musical adjustment, but with a sermon. For nearly 15 minutes, he lectured the room about obedience, purity, and divine submission. He spoke about women who forgot where their gifts came from, artists who let fame pull them away from God. Musicians shifted in their seats. No one looked directly at Patti. She listened in silence until the last thread of her patience snapped. "I came to sing, not be saved," she cut in. The room froze. Al snapped his Bible shut, the sound echoing in the studio like a gunshot. Under his breath, he muttered about women who lose their faith once they get famous, women who think their voice is bigger than the Lord's will. That was the breaking line. Patti slowly removed her headphones, set them down without a word, stepped out of the vocal booth, and walked straight out into the Memphis night. No dramatic exit, no screaming match, just a door closing softly behind her and a song that would never be finished. She never came back. Rumors spread faster than any demo tape. Some said she'd broken down crying during the final take. Others claimed Al grabbed her wrist when she tried to leave. One assistant later told Jet magazine that a raw vocal reel existed, a version where Patti's voice trembled through tears while the faint sound of the preacher's raised voice bled in through the control room mic. Whether that tape was real or not, no one ever played it for the public. Some industry insiders insisted Atlantic destroyed it to protect both of their reputations. Others swore it was locked in a vault in New York, proof of the day divinity met defiance and lost. But to really understand why that wound never closed, you had to rewind 3 years. The 18th of October, 1974. The day the world found out just how dark things could get behind Al Green's angelic tenor. That morning, Memphis police responded to a violent incident at his home. His girlfriend, Mary Woodson, attacked him with a pot of boiling grits while he was showering, leaving second-degree burns across his back. Moments later, she took her own life. His world and his public image shattered. Newspapers across the country printed the timeline in cold, clinical lines. Singer burned, woman dead, motive unclear. Fans were stunned. The incident, more than any other, blew a hole in his career. Within months, Al announced that he had heard the Lord's call. He became an ordained minister at the Full Gospel Tabernacle Church. Congregations rejoiced. The press labeled it rebirth. Patti quietly called it a disguise. Behind the scenes, people in the business whispered about the violence that had allegedly always clung to him, jealous outbursts, controlling behavior, sudden flashes of rage. By 1976, several women had accused him of aggression or manipulation, though most never spoke publicly. It was said that more than one complaint died in the shadows. So, when Patti walked into Royal Recording Studios in 1977, she wasn't just meeting a preacher. She was walking into a storm wearing a collar, and in her view, that storm hadn't changed, only rearranged its costume. The collapse of their session turned vicious in the tabloids. Gossip magazines claimed Patti had warned Al that God would punish him if he didn't confess his sins. Some reports alleged she'd cursed his next record, the Belle album, which was recorded later that year. A Detroit tabloid ran a headline along the lines of Patti's prophecy, the preacher's fall. None of those stories were ever proven. But the damage didn't need proof to spread. Al's congregation went on the defensive, saying she was jealous of his ministry and newfound calling. Some of Patti's own fans started saying she was too worldly for gospel, too bold, too sharp. The collaboration that was supposed to unite two titans of soul turned into a fault line that neither of them ever crossed again. By 1979, Al Green had retreated deeply into the pulpit, preaching every Sunday in Memphis while occasionally recording gospel records on the side. Patti moved in the opposite direction. Her shows became declarations of survival, wild, spiritual, explosive, but fully under her own authority. The same holy fire Al had tried to manage was now hers alone. Still, the scar from Memphis refused to fade. Friends said Patti stopped praying with male pastors in private for years. Whenever she was invited to perform at a religious fundraiser, she asked one quiet question before agreeing. Who else is on the bill? If Al Green's name appeared, she declined, politely but firmly. In one 1985 interview, when asked about her relationship with him, Patti smiled and replied, "He's doing his ministry. I'm doing mine." Later, speaking to a close friend in a moment that never made the press, she said something colder. "He reminds me that not every preacher wears a robe for God. Some wear it to hide the devil." The bitterness sharpened as new headlines appeared. In 1989, Al Green's former secretary filed a lawsuit accusing him of assault, a case that was later settled out of court. In 1995, another woman brought forward allegations of abuse in a complaint that quietly disappeared before trial. Each story, whether fully proven or not, tore open the wound Patti had tried to bury. Publicly, she refused to comment. Privately, she told her band that she had seen that temper, that control, that fire, long before the rest of the world caught a glimpse. When Al Green was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1995, their two paths crossed again, this time under stage lights instead of studio fluorescence. He stood at the podium, thanking God for grace. Patti was in the audience, arms folded, watching. Cameras caught her clapping once when his name was announced, not when he spoke. She did not attend the after-party. Years later, during rehearsals for her 2013 tour, a candid moment was captured on a behind-the-scenes recording. "People always ask me why I don't sing in the church anymore," she said quietly. "It's because I've seen what lives behind those pulpits. They preach forgiveness, but they never ask for it." To the world, Al Green was the sinner who became a saint, the preacher who crawled out of scandal and into salvation. To Patti LaBelle, he was a reminder that redemption could be another kind of performance, another costume, another script. He found God after sin. She found sin hiding inside men who claimed to speak for God. As her voice climbed to greater heights, she carried one conviction the preacher could never sell from any pulpit. Some songs cannot be saved. Some stories don't need redemption. They need truth. If Wilson Pickett taught her fear, and James Brown taught her pride, Al Green taught her the danger of blind faith in false prophets. When she turned her back on gospel and walked fully into soul, she understood that her power was no longer wrapped in the promise of heaven.